Good evening, everyone. Well, thank you. And welcome to Elevate Ethics, a dialogue on the state of ethical leadership in the American economy today. We're delighted that you joined us tonight. We're going to have a robust and very engaging discussion. We've already been at it in the back room, so we're all kind of warmed up a little bit here. I'm Dan Sweeney. I'm the director of the Institute for Enterprise Ethics here at the Daniels College of Business at the University of Denver. You know, the Institute and events like this could not exist if it weren't for the generosity of our sponsors and support of our partners. You've been seeing their names and logos on the video wall behind me. I hope you have anyway. But I'd like to recognize them formally right now. First, I'd like to recognize our charter sponsors. The first is CoBank. CoBank is our inaugural charter sponsor, and they helped us get the Institute launched a couple of years ago, and we're very grateful for that continuing support. Level 3 Communications is another charter sponsor. Level 3 is being very helpful to us tonight, and they're part of the reason for all the gear here. They're helping us to establish a global electronic footprint for the Institute by live streaming this event to their global IP platform, and we're very grateful for that. We have program sponsors who help support individual programs and events, and those include CH2M Hill, the Denver office of Deloitte LLC, and a variety of individual friends and members of the Institute. A couple of sponsors specifically contributed to this event, not only for the event here in the theater, but very importantly to make the live stream of the event available to teachers and students throughout the community of universities along the Rocky Mountains that's supported by the Daniels Fund. And yes, that sponsor is the Daniels Fund. Two important partners at the Institute include the Colorado chapter of the National Association of Corporate Directors. We work closely on a number of programs. And Net Impact, which is a global organization of MBA students. So thanks to all the sponsors and all the partners. We appreciate your support. We couldn't have done any of this that we're doing without you. So, why are we all here tonight? Well, we're all familiar with the regular editorials, the reportage, the punditry, the blog postings on the what is apparently the sad state of corporate ethics, the sad state of ethical leadership in our economy. Regular public opinion polls report with great detail the low level of esteem with which many of our commercial institutions and leaders are held. But what the public does not hear, has not heard in quite a while, nor very frequently, is what the business community has to say about these issues of corporate ethics and ethical leadership. It's been a kind of a one-way conversation. And that's why we're doing this tonight. We hope to achieve three goals with the Elevate Ethics event tonight. The first is to provide a platform for corporate leaders to express what they think about the current state of ethical leadership and corporate ethics in the American business economy today. Second is to provide a forum for a discussion and an exchange of ideas about how we can encourage more effective development of ethical leadership in our organizations. And finally, but probably most importantly, we want to actually advance the cause of high levels of ethical leadership in the American economy and in our commercial institutions. Well, we're very fortunate tonight because in order to help us develop that dialogue and achieve those goals, we have three outstanding senior operating executives with us tonight to shed light on these issues from their experience. We've also got with us tonight a very skilled and articulate moderator to keep the discussion kind of on point and well balanced. I'm proud to call Bob Vanderak among my closest of friends. Bob is a person with a very deep and very broad senior executive experience. He has served 5 different companies as their CEO. He has served 2 different S&P 500 corporations as a senior corporate executive. Bob graduated magna cum laude from Princeton and was a Baker Scholar at the Harvard Business School. Since leaving his active corporate life, Bob helped to form and found the Center for Corporate Excellence. He was the chairman at the Vera Leadership Institute, has taught leadership at Colorado Mountain College and at the Daniels College of Business. Together with his son, Greg, Bob has authored an outstanding book on leadership, Triple Crown Leadership, I do that every time, building excellent, ethical, and enduring organizations. This book was the winner of the 2013 U.S. Best Book Award. Bob was also recently named one of the top 100 thought leaders in trustworthy business behavior by Trust Across America. So please help me in welcoming Bob Vanderak, the moderator for our discussion tonight.
Well, thank you, Dan, and thank you to all of you for coming. There's no doubt we have some great challenges facing us in American business today. The latest Gallup surveys indicate only 33% of employees are actively engaged in their work. There's growing unrest about the gap between the top 100% and the 99%. The well-respected Edelman Trust Barometer, which has been surveyed for a number of years, tells us only 53% of respondents trust business. And shockingly, 18% of the general population trust business leaders to tell the truth. It seems each week the media has some ethical scandal that they want to talk about in American business. So who better to address these challenges than the leaders of some of our most forward-looking companies? The culture of an organization is the legacy of its leadership. What do these leaders think about the challenges to ethical behavior in corporate America today? I'll ask each panelist to make some brief opening remarks. Then I'll pose some questions to them, and then we'll open it up to questions from you, the audience, and from our broadcast participants. And finally, each panelist will make some closing remarks. So let me introduce each of our distinguished panelists. Mary McBride is president of CoBank. Mary McBride is responsible for the bank's lending units as well as its credit, banking services, and corporate communications functions. Ms. McBride also serves as chairwoman of Farm Credit Leasing. Ms. McBride joined CoBank in 1993, 21 years ago. Prior to her current position, she served in a number of executive roles, including Chief Banking Officer, Chief Operating Officer, and Executive Vice President of the bank's Rural Infrastructure Banking Group. Before joining CoBank, Ms. McBride worked as a Senior Vice President for Wells Fargo First Interstate Bank of Denver, North America. She earned her bachelor's degree from Wellesley College, a master's degree from the London School of Economics, and a Master of Science degree from Sloan School of Management at MIT. Very glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Rick Ambrose is Executive Vice President of Lockheed Martin's Space Systems Company and an officer of Lockheed Martin Corporation. Space Systems is an $8 billion enterprise with approximately 14,000 employees that serves national security, civil, and commercial customers. As Chief Executive for Space Systems, Mr. Ambrose is responsible for promoting an organizational culture that encourages ethical conduct and adherence to Lockheed Martin's values. Lockheed Martin is a leader in establishing shared standards, promulgating best practices, and promoting ethics as a business value throughout the defense industry and supply chain. Mr. Ambrose chairs the Sandia Corporation Board of Directors, serves on the board of United Launch Alliance and the Space Foundation. In electrical engineering by training, he also holds a master's degree in business administration from the University of Denver. Rick, glad to have you here.
Thank you.
And finally, Andrew Crouch. Andrew is Regional President of North America and Asia Pacific for Level 3 Communications. He's responsible for the overall business operations of the regions, including sales, marketing, and operations. He joined Level 3 in 2001 as a Senior Vice President of the Cable and Internet Service Providers Channel Group, and has since held a variety of positions within marketing, product, and commercial leadership. Most recently, he served as the Regional President of Sales in North America, where he led the commercial sales groups, including the enterprise, wholesale, content, government, and indirect channels. Prior to joining Level 3, Mr. Crouch served as the Deputy General Manager within the Corporate Clients Division of British Telecom. He also served as the Vice President of Commercial Operations for Concert Communications, a joint venture between BT and AT&T. He has a bachelor's in management sciences from the University of Manchester, England, and a Master of Science in telecommunications from the University College of London in London, England. So Andrew, welcome. What a distinguished panel. Mary, why don't we start with some opening comments from you, please?
Thank you, Bob. And firstly, I'd like to thank University of Denver and Dan for having me participate in the panel here tonight, and also thank you for your emphasis on this very, very important topic. I mean, Bob started us out with some very sobering statistics, and whether those statistics are reality, there's clearly perception. And the perception in the market today is that business leaders don't have a lot of credibility. So what does that mean for us as business leaders? We've got to step back and say, how do we manage our organizations? How do we inculcate ethics and the business acumen and understanding of integrity in our organizations? Now, I don't think organizations are innately ethical or innately unethical. You have to do this on a very proactive basis. And where I work at CoBank, we've spent quite a lot of time coming up with what are our programs, what are the things that we're instilling in our organization and in our employees to ensure that they remain ethical. We've got several of these. The first one I would start with would be, we've got a set of core values. The core values we've got are adopted by our board, and our employees are expected to abide by these. They include key aspects such as integrity and ethics. We've got a standards of conduct policy that's very broad. It goes into insider trading, distribution of confidential information, nepotism, just about anything you can think of, it covers. And every year, every employee must not only sign that standards of conduct policy acknowledgement, they also must report any suspected abuse of the policy by someone else. And that's something we just added in the last couple of years that's really been important, because we felt employees weren't comfortable coming forward and bringing things forward to us. We also have we've got a chief ethics officer who serves as a resource for our employees. If they have questions, we've got a whistleblower line, and we've got all of these areas in place to ensure that this vast area of ethical issues can be covered by our employees with resources to support them. Now, with all of that in place, you may say, well, we sit back and say, we're immune from these things, we're covered. We're not. I mean, every day I always tell the staff, we've got 850 employees, and I can guarantee you that somewhere, while we're sitting here, someone is doing something they probably shouldn't be doing. Sometimes it's knowingly, and sometimes it's unknowingly, but you always have to be prepared for how to handle these things and to keep ethics at the forefront of your organization. That would be my opening remarks.
Wonderful. Rick?
Yeah, again, thank you for hosting this. Dan as well, thank you very much. And the staff, I know it takes a lot of work to put this on. I'm happy to be here, and it's kind of like old home week, coming back to the alma mater. I actually put in practice what you all learned for your MBA programs, and it helped really contribute to my career. So it's good to be back here. You know, we talk a lot about ethics, and our corporation's very committed to this. And they kind of say, well, how do you handle ethics, and how do you create and instill that value? We'd really tell you it's a marathon, and it's not a sprint, and you have to keep at it all the time because things change. We just celebrated our centennial, a 100-year-old company. Not too many hit that 100-year mark. We've moved through many changes over the years. We have to stay focused on those values. And those values are extremely important. The three values we would talk to you about in the system that we try and drive through the organization is do what's right, respect others, and perform with excellence. Very key, and they drive through everything that we do. Now, those values have to be enduring, and they're very enduring as you move forward. We wouldn't be a 100-year-old company. So we're very proud of the men and women that have made up this company, that have fought through many issues. As you say, with your eyes one phone call away from maybe an issue you've uncovered or things. But these sustain, so let me build on one too and how it fits, respect others. So one of the things, respect others, we have a very active diversity program. Well, you can imagine approaching diversity from the 1900s to today would be quite different. But we have to work through that. It's very important to engage. When you talk about the employee engagement, we need everybody engaged, everybody driving in an open environment. And it's very much people are imperfect, right? They come in different backgrounds, different parts of life, and how do you get those standards and those rules and you drive through that? So three kind of areas that we talk about a little bit. Three principles would be communication. We constantly communicate our values, our principles, the ethics, and our expectation all the way through. As a matter of fact, we just recently rolled out our next phase with all the changes we're experiencing in our market. We call it Next Gen Lockheed Martin, or LM. And part of that is strengthen our foundation. And that core foundation is under that respect others, our ethical principles, focus on our customers' success. Second area is you have to be authentic as a leader as well as an organization or a corporation. And that's very important that we stay focused on that. And you cannot be authentic if you really don't care. And you have to own that and be responsible, and you cannot delegate off ethics or values to a staff or anywhere else. You have to own it. It starts at the top, because people will pay attention to what the leader pays attention to. Then finally, share responsibility with the team. This probably drives Lockheed Martin ethics more than anything else. And our ethical program starts at the top. We actually have an elected officer of Lockheed Martin Corporation that's responsible for both our ethics and sustainability initiatives, reports to the CEO, and 3 times a year briefs out our board of directors as we go forward. It's a formal system. It is a very formal system that's cascaded down through every level of the corporation. Everyone is accountable, every leader, and we drive it through. So for instance, we started out 2014 a training program. I attended my training yesterday, which was personally held by the Chief Executive Officer of the corporation. And then I will have to train my staff, they'll have to train their staff, and 115,000 people later, we will be all trained. And it's long, but if you don't put that kind of energy on it, right, it will not show the value that you want. Now with that, we also have to translate this so it's very meaningful to people. So you heard our values, right? Do what's right, respect others, perform with excellence. Well, in a day-to-day, employees won't know how to operate on that. So we have to give them tools. And we give them real-life examples. Because we've been at this for years, right, we have a lot of cases. And we put those cases into actual online training. We hire actors, actresses to act out those scenarios, give them tools. So one, they ask questions. They seek counsel and help, right? And we teach them to reframe the situation so it's not threatening if they have to challenge somebody else. We have 60 ethics personnel deployed through 115,000 to give guidance, or if they need to report, or even investigate when we really think we have an issue. But it's very important, because if you're going to have a sustainable organization, and we're going to be 200 years, we really have to drive this kind of behavior.
Wonderful. Thank you. Andrew.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I certainly know the panel have put a lot into this, and I hope you all get quite a bit out of this session too. Let me give you some perspective about how I personally and our leadership team, together with Level 3 as a corporation, thinks about being an ethical company. Start with the definition, ethics, derived from the Greek word ethos. Essentially, ethos is character, fabric. And we all know how much we care about developing our own characters and what that means to us. We think about the same about our corporation, our corporate character and what that means. We're firm believers in the fact that ethical companies drive loyalty across all stakeholders, not just shareholders. So we think about that as we think about our employees, the level of lift that we get from our employees who want to come to work for an ethical organization. Think about it from a customer perspective. It's clear that customers buy more from ethical organizations. Loyal customers give you a disproportionate share of their wallet. Investors, continual access to capital and funding for projects that we want to attack. So across the complete remit of stakeholders, we see that loyalty factor being driven through an ethical organization. Now, being in the communications industry for a couple of decades has allowed me to get close, but thankfully not too close, to some of the unethical practices that have transmitted through the sector. Rewind back to the beginning of the millennium, and we had essentially the gold rush going on for telecoms, the internet era, where capital was piling into our industry, where people were investing and setting up networks and chasing the internet demand profile that was seemingly insatiable. Fast forward a couple of quarters and a few years, and that demand clearly wasn't as strong as what we thought. It was lagging. Oversupply was permeating the market. And we had a number of our competitors who were taking shortcuts, overstating revenues. Swapping of fibers was one of the well-documented routine of some of the practices that were taking place. And in time, the effects of that unethical behavior was devastating. Customers were left stranded without service. Suppliers were cutting themselves off to our industry. Capital generally dried up towards the telecom area. Employees were redundant, unemployed. Many of them lost their pensions that they'd worked out for several decades. Pretty devastating blow that was created by some of those shortcuts that were taken. I think we know the names that were prevailing: Enron, Bandwidth Trading, WorldCom, local example here of Quest. Many of them got caught up in some of those unethical practices. Now, fast forward 10 years, and I'm proud to sit here and say that I work for Level 3, who thankfully has prospered, gone on and stayed away from that in our way that we transmit and perform ethically, growing and successfully serving our customers globally. It really counts. We have similar programs to what you've heard here in order to continually reinforce what we do to maintain our ethical standards. It starts at the top with our vision, trusted connection to the networked world, trusted connection to the networked world. Drop down into our values, very similar to what you've heard. Integrity plays a key role in our value set. And then we have processes and systems and programs and training that wrap all around that to support our employees. So we guide them to make the right decisions. We also support them and provide resources, because not all are black and white decisions. But we give them the forum and the opportunity to speak up, and we can talk through exactly what right looked like and get the correct answer for the company. We, as a leadership team, we continue to remind our employees daily about some of the basics as they're thinking it through. What you're doing and the decisions you make today, how would you feel if they turn up in the Wall Street Journal tomorrow? How would you feel? How would your team feel? How would your family feel and your friends? We continue to remind people not to take shortcuts. If our employees see something that is unethical or they suspect it may be, we encourage them to speak up. If they're not heard, we ask them to shout up. And if they don't get heard, we encourage them to make sure they find somebody on the executive team who will hear. As our business has become global, the importance of ethical trading is more complicated as we're navigating through different regulatory regimes, cultural, behavioral norms for both our customers and our employees. It's clear to us, and the social media would have it that way, in a very transparent way, both the upsides and downsides that surround being an ethical organization.
Excellent. You know, I heard some themes emerging from that, from all three of our panelists. This is not a one-shot deal. This is not a sprint. This is a marathon. This is the senior top leadership of the organization personally focusing on this, personally sitting through a day of training. How many times did you hear the panelists say values, values, values? And then going beyond that, support and training on an ongoing basis. So these are, I think, some of the key themes that come out of what these senior leaders are doing at their prestigious organizations. Wonderful, thank you. Mary, why don't we start with you with the first question. What are the specific challenges for a CEO to inculcate ethical leadership into an organization? And then I'll invite Rick and Andrew if they want to make some comments to whatever you have to say.
Great, thank you. I think the key here is the CEO needs to realize that he or she is the crux of this. If the CEO is not supportive or is not behaving according to those values, the employees know. The CEO is watched constantly, the behavior is watched constantly, everyone sees how he or she is behaving, and if they're not behaving the way they should be, you're never going to be able to inculcate these values and these policies and these procedures in your organization. You can train everybody as much as you want, you can have as many policies as you want, but unless the tone at the top is the right tone, you're not going to have the right values set in your organization. And that's something that we've really gotten to live by at CoBank. We very much focus on this. Our executive team goes through the same training that everybody goes through. Our board goes through the same training. Our
Really?
board signs the standards of conduct.
Wow.
They have a standards of conduct form and acknowledgement that they have to train to. Our board also receives ethical training. So we're very strong on that, and we've got to set that tone at the top. So I think for a CEO, you can't be disconnected from this. You can't just focus on the business. You've got to have this in the fabric of your organization for it really to stick with the organization.
Yeah, that really resonates. Yeah. Nobody's too cool for school.
No, no, you can't get it out. No, you're not. You're not.
But how many organizations out there actually have their board members go through ethical training? How many CEOs say, I'm going to sit through this training because you're role modeling the behavior and they are looking at you? Anything else you want to add?
No, I'd add, it's exactly right. It starts at the top, and our CEO and board go through the same training, actually look at the metrics on at least 3 times a year.
Really?
That's going on. And I'd add, once you drive the training down, you have to measure it, you got to walk the talk. Because you measure yourself by intention, but others will measure you as a leader by your actions. So if they don't see you doing that, they're not going to believe it's for real.
Yeah. As one of you said, this is not something you can delegate. This is something that you assume personal responsibility for as the leader of your organization. Right. Wonderful. Andrew, we recognize unethical leadership, and the media blows it up and talks about it all the time when we see it. Can you give us some examples from your industry and your experience of when you recognize and celebrate ethical leadership? I mean, how do you reinforce the positives, not just talk about the negatives out there?
Absolutely, and that's the negative seems to provide their own set of media attention without help, as we know. The challenge to the organization is spotting and making that positive reinforcement around ethical behaviors, and many findings suggest that that's at least 3x the powerful as negative.
Really? 3x?
Yeah, 3x the power that comes through in positive reinforcement and resonation through the organization. We spend time as a company, right the way from the CEO through all of our leadership stacks, making sure that at the quarterly recognition that our Chief Executive Officer does, he recognizes an individual across the employee base, specifically around our values, and integrity is called out. And that's transmitted across our 10,000 employee base globally. Throughout my organization, we spend time recognizing people at all hands at roundtables where we're calling out individuals who may not have made a decision orientated around profit or short-term gain, where they've had to make the hard decision with courage, which we know was the ethical one. Always put those on a pedestal and ask the employee to even talk to that themselves personally, so there's a connection there. That's the public recognition. In private, we also have within our performance workbench, a portion of how we appraise and performance review each employee through the company is attached to our values.
Excellent.
Each individual's performance relative to the values, that's quantified by their line manager throughout the year and at the end of the year, and is an input into their merit and promotional opportunities. So both in public and private situations, we continue to reward and recognize ethical behaviors.
Yeah, excellent, excellent.
We have very similar policies and work at CoBank also. In particular, through our performance development plan too, every employee has integrity and ethics as a value that they are evaluated on by their manager every year through the process. And that's very important for us, and it is looked at very critically and ensure that we maintain those values in the organization.
We discovered that too in the research that Greg and I did for a book. The really progressive organizations, the Zappos, the Google, the new Tyco, the new Xerox, they're building into the performance review system. Not only did you make your numbers, which you have to do, but are you operating by our values? And
Exactly.
that wasn't how I was raised. I never had a performance review on values. It was all about making your numbers. So there's a sea change coming because of these kinds of progressive organizations.
Bob, we're also implementing that in our hiring process. We're really
Really?
trying to ensure that we're hiring people that are the right fit for the organization. And when we look at fit, it's not skill sets. We think we can train skill sets, but what we can't train is people who have the same values that we have, that
Yeah.
are going to fit into the organization and follow those values. So we work very carefully with that through our hiring process.
And we heard that too in our research. So you're hiring not only for skill set, but for cultural fit.
Yes.
And that doesn't mean you want everybody to be the same.
Not at all.
There's great diversity there in skills and backgrounds, but they are fitting the culture, the values that you want in your organization. I think that's really a strong trend today. Absolutely. Rick, when the economic climate changes significantly and the competition really gets intense, how can a leader ensure his team behaves ethically and avoids cutting those corners? There's so much pressure. There's so much short-termism going on today. People want to make their numbers. Bonuses are riding on it. What can you do to make sure that they make their numbers but still operate ethically?
Very good question in today's environment.
We're all anxious to hear
We're
your
all
answer.
I don't have magic dust for you, though. No, matter of fact, for us in our industry, we face that today. Many of our customers, our government, we're coming off from 2008, a recession, global recession, a lot of challenges on budget, but our customers still have to meet their needs, fulfill their missions. And for us, it's especially challenging because the consequence of failure is high.
Yeah.
Lives are at stake.
Right? Lives are at stake, high costs are at stake. There's not a lot of money in the budget to replace that. So we actually have to put extra energy on that. But one of the things we rally people around is our mission, and you'll hear us talk about 100% mission success. Every rocket launch satellite has to work. When we put astronauts in an Orion capsule we're designing down the road here, we have to bring them back alive. We have to protect the lives of the men and women that serve, in this country. So that's a very good rallying cry, but we still have to meet those budgets, right? So we've actually used a technique with the team called smart affordability. If you think back to some of the 80s and 90s, businesses just cut. They said they just cut headcount, said work harder. Right. We cannot do that. We have to be very disciplined, very objective about going through, looking at the operations. How do you, reduce that cost, that infrastructure, but do it in a way that's not going to jeopardize your primary product as you go out the door, right? The other thing, we have a motto in the company that we never forget who we're working for. And that's to bring it home about that lives, because the men and women out there that have chosen to serve this nation and risk all are at the line of our products and services, and we want to bring them home. Yeah. And it's very powerful as we go forward. Now, with that said, we're just like any other business.
Sure.
You're trying to do more with less. You're trying to shrink cycle times, improve productivity. But there are ways to do this and do it in a very structured way and not violate your values. You got to keep those up, keep communicating, every leader, every supervisor in the organization.
So it sounds like you see this as a moral imperative, as an ethical
much so.
imperative. But your concept of the smart affordability, yeah, we've got to get cost out of the organizations, but it's not just 10% across the board. We've got to be smart about this kind of thing. I
Exactly.
think that's really excellent.
Yeah.
Andrew, did you want to add something
Yeah,
to
I'd
that?
add a couple of things, and Rick said it earlier. It's important that leadership owns the challenge and doesn't delegate it on down. But one of the areas that's worth tighter inspection when temptation rises as people are trying to cut corners is that front line of leadership, which is often where
Absolutely.
the moral and the ethical issues get blocked. They don't get bubbled up.
Yeah.
So I know we spend a lot of time making sure we're doing those skip level meetings to get right to the heart of that level of leadership and listen hard. You really, 2 ears, 1 mouth, really listen hard intensely to hear what's going on and encourage that speech to come through.
So it's good that the senior executives are role modeling this and taking it as a moral imperative, but most employees take their cues from their immediate first-line supervisor. So unless you're getting that message down to them, it's really going to be lost up at the top there. So excellent point. All right, we're going to throw some general questions out to the panel, so I don't want you to all jump up at once. But so Dan was talking about the reportage that we get and all these scandals and all this headline, this 24/7 news cycle that we're in. When you hear all these critiques about business today, or some of the stats that I quoted at the outset about trust and engagement, how do you feel? And what do you think we as business leaders, the people in this room, what can we do about this kind of thing? What's your reaction, Mary?
I'll start out. I don't feel good. Let me start with that one. I don't feel good. When I started in banking, it was over 30 years ago, and banking was about the stodgiest, most conservative business you could go into. It was never one where I thought I would be embarrassed to say I was a banker. And then when we had the crisis in 2008, I had a child in high school and a child in college at the time, and I'm trying to explain to my children that I'm really not evil, that working in banking is not bad. Yeah. But I think what comes out of this is you've really got to be proactive. You've got to tell your story. And unfortunately, there were some bad stories in the business environment. And those were the stories that got told. The stories that you're hearing tonight don't get told. And I think companies just have to be more proactive, both with their employees and with all of their stakeholders, their shareholders, their customers, on the good things that they are doing.
I'll add to that. It's Mary's right. It's not good. There's a lot of distrust of major social institutions and things. And Andrew said it earlier. It just takes one incident in the front page,
Right.
and it ruins a whole group. And we have 115,000 employees. It only takes one.
That's right.
So many are dedicated. So many work hard. So many are trying to do the right thing. And it's kind of a shame, but I think we just have to stay focused. Keep the marathon. Keep improving, show the good that's done no matter what industry you're in, and how you're contributing to society and the economy, and hopefully we'll pull through some of those trust numbers.
And I think we have to continue to have events like this. Elevate ethics. Let's get some progressive leaders who are doing some things in the front lines and have them tell their story so that all of you out there can feel encouraged about it. We need to talk about it and keep going at it. Absolutely. Okay, another question for the panel in general, and I want you folks out there, or in radio land, broadcast land, wherever you are, to be thinking of some tough questions here, the real questions that you're wrestling with out there, because we've got a few questions that I'll throw out, but we want to hear reactions from you, so please don't be shy. But while they're thinking, how do we build ethical leadership into the company? I worked in a lot of industries and a lot of companies, and I saw a lot of value statements, and they were on the website, and there might be a poster on the wall, but that wasn't the reality. I mean, it was almost a joke. It was a platitude. These are the values we operate by here. Everybody knows the Enron story. They had all these values, and now they're a joke. You can buy the Enron Values Cube on the internet. How do you take them from just being posters on a wall, which is what it was for so many years, while at the same time making sure, as we said before, that we make our numbers, our financial targets?
You got to make it. You got to make it real. You got to take those value statements off the wall and translate them into real life situations for the employees to understand.
What does that mean, Andrew?
We heard it before with Rick, which is, you know, some of the training and the reinforcement that goes on around real situations that
In your
business,
industry,
in
that-
your
that-
industry that the employees can relate to, and the light bulb comes on. I don't want to fly in the face of the positive reinforcement message we talked about before, but enterprise justice does count as well. When people overstep beyond that boundary of the ethical standards you expect in your organization, timely, quick, consistent action needs to take place. People need to know where that boundary is and the consequences of stepping over.
The consequences are being you have to terminate some people.
Absolutely.
Potentially. It's one of the options that's there.
And how do you terminate somebody for an ethical violation and still have the privacy and not get sued? And, you know, how do you send that message out that this is what we have to do because somebody made their numbers by stepping over the boundary, but you can't really say it all?
Often it gets known.
It gets known. People
without
know.
broadcasting it or putting it on the
You don't have to
web.
put a press release out and say.
And I always take the moment to remind the team about a certain policy. that
Okay.
will-
Let me just
will-
coincidentally remind you about this policy.
that gets enough attention
Yeah.
without getting into the specifics. The other thing is measuring it. If it's not measured, it's not managed. And there are ways, quantified and soft measurements as well, to check how an organization is standing behind its ethical standards.
What kind of measurements do you have in mind, Andrew, if I may ask?
Check around certification. We talked about people doing the training. Check around when we've had internal audit and they've come in and identified risk. Have we completed those mitigation plans that we set on time?
Excellent.
Number of incidents and violations we have in certain policies. Is it homing you down to a particular risk area?
So you're really taking a metrics approach to looking at all this, and people know that you're looking at it.
Surveys that we hand out. around the
Surveys of
culture.
employees, yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Let me
Sure.
add some interesting
Rick.
stats we use. We survey employee surveys. We also run our metrics. I mentioned we have 60 ethics folks. We actually measure the kind of reporting that goes on, right? So for instance, if we have anonymous reporting, we don't like that. And we actually watch that metric, and we want it to taper near zero, and we're doing pretty good. It's pretty close to zero. We started our programs years ago, it was not. The other thing we look for is consultation or guidance. If employees are calling our ethics team and asking for advice on something, they saw this, we consider that very good, which would prevent maybe something that would be a real violation. We'd have to do an investigation and have disciplinary action. And yes, we do everything from warnings, letters, time off without pay, to termination. And the higher up in the company you go, your standards you're held to a much stricter standard. And we do pick our leaders by those standards that drive to those standards and behave to those standard values.
One of the hardest things you confront is when some of your best performers behave unethically. And you've got to be consistent, and you can't let that impact your decision. If it is against the company's policy, regardless of their performance, you've got to adhere to what those policies are and take action, because otherwise it's sort of like the CEO I talked about earlier. Everybody's watching and everybody knows.
It's toxic.
Yeah, right.
So some of the things I'm hearing are, this is not something that can be delegated at senior leadership. Values, the persistence that you have to stay with this. It's just a cadence, a drumbeat. It needs training and support. It needs celebration and acknowledgement. It needs role modeling by the top people. It needs measurement, metrics. We take the things from the quality industry and we really say, how are we going to measure these kind of ethereal things? You build it into the performance reviews, and you have to be tough enough to separate the violators, even if they're the star performers.
Right. Well, one other attribute of this culturally is you have to take fear out of the system,
That's very important.
have transparency, because you need a speak-up culture so your employees can speak truth to power, right? this is wrong. I saw this. And know that they can do that with no, concern of any retaliation or concern for their career. If anything, be celebrated and, right, be awarded.
Reward the messenger.
Reward the messenger. Yeah. A speak-up culture. I like that.
Right.
People feel empowered to do that because they know that this is what the senior management, the board, as you
The
talked
board.
about, the CEO, this is what they want.
Correct.
That's excellent. Excellent. What about subjects like environmental sustainability? We hear so much today about climate change. We hear about consuming resources. Does that fit into this whole conversation about ethical leadership, and why? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll go start. Well, as I mentioned, our elected officer is ethics and
sustainability. Yeah.
And matter of fact, we've just started, for 3 years, been running a sustainability report. I think it was 2 years ago, we now post it online.
You post it online.
Online in our website.
Your numbers, good or bad.
Good or bad. And we have we had a from 2010 to 2020 program of 35% reduction commitments, or putting out there for our shareholders, our investors, everything to see, of 35% reduction of greenhouse gases, 35% reduction of waste to landfill, and 25% reduction in energy. And remember, $45 billion company is quite large,
Yeah, that's huge.
yeah, it's
huge.
It's quite significant, and we just feel it's right. And a lot of the, especially new hires, grads coming out, they want to see that kind of commitment and that kind of ethics, and it ties to ethics, and believe it or not, it's good for business.
Absolutely.
Right? Because as you lean on operations and things, you're going to get a benefit from sustainability.
So the sustainability is good for business because you're reducing costs, because more and more customers are probably aware of this and giving you some loyalty or brand reputation.
Right.
But why did you combine ethics and sustainability? Why aren't they two separate functions?
Well, you can argue they're two different functions, but we put that within the same appointed or elected officer for the corporation to give it the attention and intensity that we wanted to have on that.
Yeah, to me, they almost seem like two sides of the same coin.
They kind of
How
are.
can you be ethical if you're not being sustainable and
Correct.
concerned not only about the environment, but about people? Are we burning
about
people
people.
out? Are we doing things that
Exactly.
are unsustainable internally? So, yeah.
Right.
Right. We've got a program that's got a corporate social responsibility program, it's got a sustainability program, and then our ethical program. And they're all managed somewhat differently, but they are all parts of the same coin. And we look at it really as, you need to be a good corporate citizen. If you're going to attract the best employees, if you're going to attract the best customers, you need to ensure you are a good corporate citizen. You need to give back to your community. So as part of our corporate social responsibility program, we have a certain percentage of our income that we give in charitable contributions. As part of our sustainability program, we buy wind credits to offset our energy use. We also have a renewables loan portfolio and other aspects of that. All employees get eco passes and such. But we do think that they're all kind of holistically together in being a good corporate citizen.
Well, we talk about this good corporate citizen, but wait a minute now, guys. We've got this fiduciary obligation to maximize our shareholder value. I mean, isn't that the mantra we've been taught in business schools for the last 30 years? Are you saying we are not there to maximize our shareholder value? How does this fit into that?
We look at our shareholders and our stakeholders as being a group there, and you maximize the value by maintaining the best organization you can. We're still good stewards of the funds. Don't get me wrong, we're not going out and doing ridiculous things with the money. We want to be a profitable organization, but at the same time, we think part of being who we are is being a good corporate citizen, and that's part of it, and our board is very supportive of it too.
You can't maximize for the long run without having a
Exactly.
sustainability connection and dependency between the corporation and society. You can't, they're not separated at all, they're knitted together. You can't afford the reputation risk of not being eyes on sustainability.
You can't afford the scandal risk of it blowing up on you when something happens there. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. How about the young people? We have a lot of young people in the audience and on the webcast today, the millennial generation. As you engage them in the workforce, do you find that they're concerned about this? I mean, some have said this is the entitlement generation, this is the me generation. Are they concerned about these things? And if they are, how do you engage them? How do you, I mean, we're all fairly senior up here. How do you engage the younger generation on this? Yeah.
I'll go, you kind of said the me gender. I hadn't heard that, but it's kind of funny. I heard that about the 80s folks, too.
Maybe it's a cycle.
It's kind of a cycle going around and around. Is look, people are appealing, and I think you know, this is a generation that's come in with a lot of choice, a lot of tools at their hand with the internet. But our studies show they want to go work for an ethical company, one that cares about its community, the environment, and be part of that. And what I would say to folks is, you know, companies commit to that, but as you come in, there's a ethical responsibility for every employee, right? That they have to own their own integrity as they come into an organization, as the organization does. And frankly, I think as you interview with companies, you should look for that cultural, I can't remember if it was you or Andrew said it earlier, that cultural integration. You should be interviewing for those kinds of attributes. Just like companies are interviewing you for your behavior and your value systems as well as your skills.
Okay, good. So what advice would you give to students today? We've got some MBA students in the audience today, some undergraduates focusing in business. What advice would you give to them about dealing with the ethical issues that might occur, or probably will occur? I mean, I think one of the things I say in my MBA classes is you will be confronted by ethical issues, and maybe you ought to think about that right now. So what advice can you give the
I'll start out with our ethics officer has a line that we can all take from, which don't make a mistake alone. He always says, look, if you've got a question, if you've got a concern, come talk to somebody, bring somebody else into that dialogue with you. And I think organizations today try to set up safe places for you to talk. If you're not comfortable talking to your manager, you can talk in human relations, you can talk to an ethics officer, and last case, you can go to these whistleblower lines that I think most organizations also have too if you're really not comfortable talking to anyone about it. But I think it's key, don't stand on your own, and if you feel that something is unethical, speak up. I think it is very critical to speak up and ensure that your voice is heard on those issues.
Yeah, I would second that. In my opening comments, I talked about that, the tools, you have to give practical tools to employees. We talked about making sure that they get data, have facts, ask questions, communicate, seek help. I think we're totally in alignment on that. And we'd also talk about reframing if they're in a situation with another employee or a supervisor, because sometimes if you're in a contentious discussion, if you reframe it, you can make it safe. So you can have an objective dialogue versus one that looks like it's threatening. And that's exactly the kind of training we do with these video vignettes, and what leader-run training is to walk them through those skills, have them practice in a group, that kind of skill set.
Yeah.
Have courage.
Courage.
Courage. Speak up. Conviction. Stick by your own values, the corporation's values, and you know, make sure, as you said, when you're out there and you're dealing in the gray. Usually we have a catchphrase that if you're asking whether or not this is the right thing to do, you probably know the answer.
That's right.
So you can ride off a lot of your gut and your instincts, and through your career you'll build up more and more of that experience, muscle power. But if not, don't go it alone. You'll know when it's feeling it's gray, then pull in some advice. It'll be sound.
I want to punctuate that word courage. I think that's really worthwhile thinking about and talking about. It takes courage to do these kinds of things. It takes courage to be a whistleblower. I remember one time we were contemplating an action in a company I was running, and one of the officers was sitting there, and it was really one of these where you were kind of wondering, Andrew, and this officer made an impassioned plea, and he said words to me that live in my mind to this day. I don't care if I'm a voice of one in this room. We can't do that.
Right.
And that just echoed, and it took courage for the person to do that, to be a voice of one. And how many times I thought back in my career when I didn't have the courage to be a voice of one, and I saw some practices that I really didn't like. But I very much like don't make a mistake alone. I mean, our ability to delude ourselves, to self-rationalize things, and so having the ability to talk with some trusted folks and not make that lonely decision, I think, is really important. Excellent. Excellent. What about when we get into promotions? What about when we get into executive compensation? We got all these big bonuses. We got this spread between the 1% and the others. I mean, how do you build this into a compensation program to be competitive out there? Because you have to pay competitive rates. But how do you build these kinds of ethical practices, the values-based things, into who you promote and your executive compensation plan?
Well, as we said earlier, every one of our executives and leaders are measured to our ethical standards. And they will not be move up in the corporation and be given higher levels of responsibilities, managing thousands of people, where they have to set examples, because you're on stage 24/7, right? So they're held to a higher standard and will be measured to that standard as an executive and higher. As for compensation, compensation is usually set from a market-based approach and analysis and who the peer competitor groups are, and that's how that gets set. I don't care where we use the same standards no matter where you're at in that compensation sphere.
We actually switched this year in our performance development plan for our more senior executives to one where instead of your ratings being focused more on, did you meet the business goals, did you get all of these things done, did the financial aspects of it, they're on the behavioral characteristics that we've set. And if you don't hit those behavioral characteristics, you're not going to be promoted, you're not going to be highly rated. Those are the more critical things we have decided for an executive than did you meet your financial goals. You've got to hit those.
So are the behavioral characteristics an outgrowth of the values?
Yes.
They're more specific
Yes.
behaviors.
Yes.
So you're not only saying, here are our grand value, we want to be
Yes.
excellent, we want to be, but here are some behaviors that we expect you, and we're going to judge your performance, and your bonus or your increase is going to be
Absolutely.
judged on those behaviors.
Absolutely.
Wow.
We have some of that in our performance workbench, like I said. I think the only other thing I'd add to compensation is make sure the right balance is placed on the long-term compensation structure.
That's a good point.
To avoid the draw of shortcuts, fast buck, short-termism. At the executive level, we have to have our eyes out for the long run and make sure we're building a sustainable business and all that goes with it.
So one of the impressions I'm getting from this is that the outside world may think that when a corporation says we want to be ethical, it's kind of a grand statement, there's a press release, and then you kind of get back to business as usual. But what I'm hearing from these panelists here, this is a serious, ongoing, detailed, metric-driven, build it into the performance review, have the training. It's a significant effort from the senior leadership of the firm, the board, right down through to the first-line supervisors. This is not just some paper over, we want to be known as ethical. This takes a tremendous amount of time and attention. Is that a fair summary of what I'm hearing?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely.
I mean, certainly in my experience, and don't ask me the Europe versus North American because it was 14 years ago when I've been there, but I would certainly say over the last decade I have seen that intensity pick up. Now, that might coincidentally be as I've taken a more senior role in the organization and there's higher standards, but I just feel that there's more intensity and rigor around this topic permeating all the way through the organization.
Why do you think that is, Andrew? Is that because of the scandals? Is it because of Sarbanes-Oxley or Dodd-Frank or government intrusion?
All of the above, I would say. I mean, in our industry, like I said, I gave some very close-to-home examples that people fell foul of. That's very obvious. The negative is extremely apparent. The positive is part of the belief system. You know, ethical organizations, you get more loyal customers, better productivity from the workforce, people want to work there, attrition is lower, they put in the discretionary effort because they know they're working for a company with ethics. The belief of the positive, and the compound of the negative drives the intensity. And then you have the regulatory bodies as well that are driving deeper and deeper at this topic.
Yeah, I just say all stakeholders are demanding that kind of the integrity of an organization, whether it's your shareholders that are investing in you, whether it's your customers that are buying from you, or more importantly, your employees that are invested in you, right, and want a career, but also, you know, our employees are a pretty substantial owner, shareholder of our corporation.
I think that's an interesting comment that you make there, Rick, that all the stakeholders are now demanding this kind of performance.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just driven by government regulations.
No.
It's not just driven by your own sense of what's right or wrong. Business needs to recognize today that you're not going to be able to compete in the world in the future because your customers, your employees, your business partners, your shareholders are all demanding this kind of thing.
Correct.
That's correct.
Interesting. Interesting. Well, I'm wondering if we have any questions from the audience that we would like to entertain. The panel, I'm sure, would be happy to. Yes, how are we going to handle the, you want to just shout them out, or is there a mic? Oh, we got a microphone back over here, so yes.
Hi, I'm a alumni, a graduate of the EMBA program, Cohort 50, and this question is for Mr. Crouch. As a person who serves a large geography to include APAC, as well as working in a joint venture scenario previously in your career, how do you see tactically companies who want to integrate this concept with the entire value chain to include strategic business partners, joint ventures, and the like?
It's one that requires a lot of attention and a lot of diverse thinking to navigate through all those particular parties that are involved in the business chain. Traversing continents and countries really puts our attention on understanding what are those, not just regulatory differences that we need to understand and integrate into our policies, but also the cultural norms and behaviors that both our customers and our employees and our suppliers exhibit. So it requires a lot greater depth of understanding and significantly increases the complexity. So that would be my initial response to your question.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll add to that as well. In our industry, interesting fact is for every dollar we receive from our customers, 60 cents go out to our partners or supply chain or everything. So we actually hold that supply chain to these same standards. And we would qualify them to work with us because we will not want to tolerate a risk in the supply chain that could jeopardize our integrity to the customer. As a matter of fact, for smaller companies, we even have mentoring programs where we give them the standards if they didn't have the money to set this up, and give them our guidance and criteria for to work with us.
Excellent. So other comments or questions?
Thank you. From an international perspective, how do you make sure that your international employees are getting the message you're trying to deliver, especially with cultural differences and some maybe reluctance to do things a different way? So
similar to what we said earlier, that training and ownership is owned by the leaders on down. Through our particular organization, we have regional presidents in each of the countries that we operate in, led by local leadership who are entrenched with the team there and more often than not have spent years, if not decades, in those operating environments. So we rely on, other than the average language translations, etc., we rely on the intimacy of those markets through our local leadership to cascade and own the education and also the reinforcement and also the tracking of our compliance there.
So are the standards, if I can build on that question, are the standards that you hold your international leaders to the same? Or do you really say there's a certain part of the world, there are certain business practices that are standard and we have to have a different set of standards in this part of the world than we do here? Are they the same or are they different?
No, we hold the same standard.
The same standard
So-
worldwide.
Worldwide. So for instance, I mean, there are certain, we have to abide by the laws and rules, of a sovereign nation, right?
Of course.
But we apply our same ethical standard code performance. So for instance, there are companies you can go and pay,
Facilitating payment, shall we
facilitate
Yes,
say?
payment.
that's
That's what I was
exactly,
going
yeah.
to do. We abide by, that is not in our ethical code.
No
That is
facilitating
not allowed, even if a competitor in that country is doing it because it's allowed in that country, it is not allowed here. And
But
we
won't you
follow-
lose some
We follow
business?
US laws.
Won't you lose some business?
That's fine.
That's fine.
That's fine.
That's fine.
Yep, yep.
Your answer is that's fine, because we're not operate
Because
that.
you
Not
can't
gonna
operate that
compromise.
We're
way.
not going to compromise.
Correct.
There's an awareness of norms and
Of
business
course.
behaviors in different countries, but similar, we
Yeah,
have
you
the
can't.
same global standards that we won't compromise.
The thing about the consequence, if you compromise,
Comes all the way
look,
home.
it's a
Exactly.
slippery slope. You start compromising here, giving up there, before you know it, then how do you keep a lot of employees on your value system?
So there's a zero tolerance.
Zero tolerance.
I think it's Clayton Christensen from Harvard who said it's easier to be ethical 100% of the time, because once you take the first step down the slippery slope, it's so easy to rationalize that second step and the third step, and sooner or later, there you are.
That's absolutely true.
So it's a
Right.
universal standard. Excellent question. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Other questions from the audience? Sir? I want to hear from this side of the room over here.
We have an excellent group, three great speakers who companies would fund something called Elevate Ethics, and hand-selected by Dan because of their passion and experience in the subject. So I'm curious what we'd say to a cynic, and let me characterize a cynic. A cynic might be someone who went to the University of Chicago who believes Milton Friedman was correct when he said the business of business is to make a profit, and their ethical responsibilities, so much as they exist, are to stay out of regulatory hell. They might have read The Fountainhead when they were in college and decided that corporate social responsibility, rather than being an obligation of corporations, is in fact a travesty and a disservice to their shareholders and the founders. And they might well have be a student of the Fox Business Report, which says that climate change is a conspiracy and sustainability is a conspiracy to undermine the fabric of American industry and society. So, I mean, there are people like that, right? I'm not, this isn't a fantasy scenario. So what would we say to a chief executive who, what's the win for them when we're not preaching to the choir? What would we say to one of those people? Without getting into the technicals of whether climate change is a reality or not or anything like that, but what would you say the imperative is for organizations who have a different view of business ethics?
What I would say there is I really believe that since we have focused on these areas, we are a more attractive place to work. We are getting better employees. We are retaining customers. It is something that our stakeholders care about. I do agree with you, there are companies out there that don't care, but I think in today's environment, it's harder and harder to maintain your customers and to maintain your employees and to attract the right people if you don't have a sense of what's right.
I also think if I can add my own comments
Sure.
on that, I know I'm supposed to just moderate here, but I can't help it.
Feel free, yeah.
This stuff. That there's a growing body of evidence that shows that the most ethical companies outperform
Yes.
the Standard & Poor's averages.
Absolutely.
The most respected companies outperform. The most trusted companies outperform. Now, I'm not sure we can ever prove causation, because there are a lot of factors that go to success. But there's a tremendous body of evidence growing that says, it's just as the panel said, the customers are going to feel more trusting. There's going to be loyalty, the innovation. And so I would say to that CEO, there's a growing body of evidence that your bottom line is going to be a lot better. Forget about whether it's right or wrong. You ought to do it just because it's right. But you want good financial performance? This is the wave of the future.
Yeah, I would also,
Just if I may follow up, we don't want to reduce ethics to a financial conversation. We don't want to reduce it to
No.
an employer brand.
No.
Absolutely.
Customer
No.
brand. So what do we say then? What do we say then? Are we offering, in a sense, financial justifications for ethical behavior?
I was trying to address your cynical CEO. I thought that argument would appeal to him, but I'll turn to my trusted colleagues.
so you're back over to us.
Back over to you.
Well, let me ask you, let's go back to circa 80s, since that was the First Me group. What was going on in quality in this country there? Right? We were getting hammered in this country on quality during different industry segments. And there were those CEOs that said they can't afford to pay for that quality. They'll just fix it later. But it was shown that to get that customer trust, maintain that, you had developed quality systems. Today, you better have good quality or you don't have a seat at the table in every phase. It's just the demands are there. And I think ethics is the same way in sustainability. Again, sustainability isn't just about green for green's sake, but sustainability tied to the viability of a business, tied to long-term profitability and return to those shareholders, I think is powerful.
I also think attracting employees stays very key in this.
Yeah.
If you go back 30, 40 years, employees went to work, they had defined benefit pension plans, they stayed with the employer, they may have been miserable and they not wanted to move on, but that doesn't work anymore. You've got to be an attractive place. There are too many options for employees, and there's more flexibility in the workforce and more willingness to move around in the workforce.
I think a part of that willingness to move around too is that when they see something they don't like, they've
Yeah,
got a
exactly.
cell phone, they can just take a picture. They can make a recording. This is the age of WikiLeaks, this is the age of Snowden, this is the age of you can't hide it anymore.
Exactly.
Because if they don't like it, they're going to take a picture and it's going to be out there. So that's a part of it too. Apparently we've got Twitter here. I don't know what the hashtag is. I don't know what's the hashtag.
Now, does
Dan?
that surprise you?
Well, we have a Twitter question, okay?
Cool.
So this came in, so this is for the panel. If the panel wants to pass on it, we'll give it to the audience to see if they can. But have you encountered an ethical dilemma that was a catch-22? That is, that there is no obvious good solution?
That's too many characters for Twitter.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, you would impress me if you could do the Jimmy Fallon interpretation there, but I would tell you, this kind of builds an earlier question about hiring folks, and what do you tell young folks, but if you have a value system, and you have that moral compass, think of the lighthouse that's going to guide you, the number of things that fall gray are extremely rare.
Right.
Extremely rare. And once in a while you can find there could be maybe it's a regulatory issue with the government that looks a little gray, or I want to say gray, hard to interpret, or something else. Then you reach out, you'll get general counsel advice, and if you're really unclear, you go outside counsel. Is this what this meant? And you can, or you call up the regulatory agency. Is this what you meant? It's just like you can reach out as an employee, you can reach out as an organization. And again, if you're honest, ethical, doing what's right for your customers, you're not going to be afraid to reach out and have that conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're not going to do it alone. You're going
Right.
to
Yeah.
widen that circle of discussion.
I don't think there have been situations where it's been a catch-22, but there are situations where the discipline out of it is difficult. Deciding what is enough, how do you manage that? How is that person treated? How far over the line did they go? Those are areas that you can spend a lot of time on and focus on with, determining what is right and ensuring you maintain that consistency.
Those are
Because that's core to keeping your programs alive
Those
in
are
the
tough.
fabric of the organization.
So
Those are
they're
tough judgment calls.
They are.
Yes.
Mary.
And
Very
I'll tell,
tough.
and I'll tell you how serious they are. We were in the middle of about ready to close an acquisition of another company, and we uncovered things in this company that would violate our value system. After spending the money, getting right up to the close date, we withdrew.
You withdrew.
The corporation withdrew. Support of the board, the CEO.
And you had a lot of money invested
We
in
had a
doing
lot of
that
money
deal.
invested.
Due diligence, lawyers.
But the consequence of going through and the cost then, and when it hit, if it hit the papers or hit anything else, our customers would see that it was not worth it.
And that takes the courage that Andrew was talking about, because you're going to take a financial hit to write off all those expenses.
Correct.
Be less than the reputational risk,
That's
though,
right.
I think Rich was
Exactly.
pointing out.
Right.
And that's the kind of more proactive, intelligent trade-off the senior leaders in your organizations are making today that are different from what I saw 20 or 30 years
Right.
ago.
So to the question you had, you could argue that's a catch-22. I've invested this money. You know, but if you're asking yourself, you're getting into that slippery slope, and if you have that lighthouse,
That's just rationalization, that's self-delusion.
that's exactly
Well, it's
right.
interesting that you kept asking yourself as well, right, the way up to that
Yep,
finish line.
Yep.
Didn't satisfy with yesterday's answer or the month before answer.
It's
Daily
probably,
vigilance.
and it's probably also a sign that if you found that in the final due diligence, there were probably other things buried a lot deeper.
that would have been the logic of the discussion, or I should say the heart of the discussion right there.
All right, so let's turn back to our audience for some more questions that are burning inside of you. Sir, down here, please.
One issue that boards and CEOs are considering and perhaps wrestling with today, and the media is giving a lot of attention to, is the corporate tax rate in this country. And there's a lot of transactions under discussion where an inversion takes place, where a corporation moves its jurisdiction to another country and pays a lower tax rate. Is that just good corporate fiduciary responsibility in terms of returning the best value to your shareholders, or is that an ethical or perhaps a moral issue? What's the panel's view on that?
It's a, well, I'll tell you, it's a good question. I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer that because we work mostly with the U.S. government. 80-some% of our business is here domestically, and then the rest is international. And about 75 countries really supporting our products and a lot of our customers. So, you know, I'm not really qualified to. It is a big debate I see and I read about in the press. You know, taxes do drive behavior of companies in different countries, especially in a consumer kind of product way where I see a lot of the discussion going on. So I don't know if you have any
Yeah.
experience with that.
I don't have any experience either. We're a domestic organization principally, but I don't know if Andrew does, or pass the buck down to him.
Hey, Andrew, you have to hand it off to
You can pass
I have opinions on everything.
72% of our revenue in North America count as a cop-out as well? I haven't been involved in those discussions at all. I would suspect that there's a lot of ethical rigor and discussion around the pros and cons of that, and if you're landing on a certain position, then you've got to be able to articulate to all of the stakeholders why that's the right decision for the company and for all the stakeholders. But
Yeah, I would.
Fiscal only.
Yeah, I would opine on that. I think it's a tough question because you can argue that. I think I read recently that GE has paid zero tax in recent years. You know, huge. You know, so you say, is that right? And one could say, well, shouldn't they pay some minimal tax then? Well, if they're going to do that voluntarily, how are the shareholders going to feel about that? How are the employees going to feel? Because they might have got raises. There might have been some new product innovation. So you're really in an ethical dilemma where I think the government policymakers and the business roundtable and those executives have to come together and say, our tax code needs to be reformed. It's not right now. It's encouraging some things that are really bordering on ethical. But I don't think there is an easy answer to that kind of thing. But it's the kind of dialogue that should take place to reform our tax code. I don't think corporations that make a lot of money should skate for years with making no tax payment. On the other hand, you've got to do that broadly and not just say, why didn't GE make a contribution to the government? Because they're going to have probably lawsuits there. That's a dialogue that we, all of us who are concerned about these things, need to engage in. That's how I would add something. Yes.
Along that same line, this question of it being illegal or immoral, unethical, but not illegal. In fact, Senator Bill Bradley related a story where one of the big, and some of these comes out of some of the too big to fail kind of companies, where a senior executive was talking to the CEO, and the answer he got was, it is immoral, but it's not illegal, so we're going to proceed. And it seems to me, going back to your percent of trust in large corporations, a lot of it is because of some of these very large corporations. How do we extricate ourselves? How do we build this trust as a nation?
I think that's a very, very good question. And when I think about this, I start looking back on, when I started my career 30 years ago, no one in any organization talked about ethics. They didn't talk about corporate social responsibility. They didn't talk about sustainability. None of these were issues. The issues were much more akin to what you were talking about, which was how do we make money? And I see when I listen to everything you're hearing up here, how much organizations have changed, but how that doesn't correlate well with what we've got out of the press and what we've got out of the perceptions. And I think it's a dialogue. I think it's more of a communications vehicle. I think it's having more organizations talk about what it is that they are doing. And you probably have some issue here too of more discipline around those that have misbehaved. I think that's one of the things that you see that has caused a lot of concern is there hasn't been a lot of accountability for people who did not behave in organizations.
Yeah, interesting point. I was struggling with how to answer that here for a minute, because that was during a time of crisis. 2008, walking right into that recession, you had all these financial stresses and some things, but that's when I first heard the term anyway, too big to fail, and that I think the policymakers were struggling with, wow, if they go down, it's bad for business. Look at how many more people are unemployed. I think it was well intended. But if you look at this country, it learns. It's kind of like in here of Winston Churchill's quote of, after the U.S. exhausts all other options, they always do the right things. If you go back, I pick on my industry back in the 70s. Back then, it wasn't illegal to pay for support.
Right.
Right, there were 400 companies that went in and testified that all were doing this practice, but they said, this really isn't good for the nation. And that's where we inherited, we created, the legislative branch created the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FCPA, which we train every employee on every year, year over year, in the company to make sure they abide by that act. So I think, as you go through that crisis, some things were done. I think in this debate and the dialogue, we'll eventually end up with the right place, with the right policies. We're still clawing our way through the recession. Coming out, or we're out, but, employment and things, there's still a lot of, stresses in the economy.
Other questions? Bruce, I'm counting on you back up there. Scott, come on now. I know you guys you're in the Bruce Hutton. All right. Thank you, sir. And there was a hand down here from Bill. I'm sorry. We got another question down here after Bruce.
First of all, thank you all for coming and kind of reinforcing what we're trying to do here at DU and have been for quite some time. The notion that part of the conversation that we've just had drives me back to a statement that was made earlier, which is that all stakeholders are starting to demand ethical behavior. It doesn't feel like that to me. It doesn't feel like people are demanding ethical behavior from companies that are not doing good or even getting caught doing bad things when their stock price doesn't go down. They continue to be invested in, et cetera. Because you have to deal with so many stakeholders, how does your kind of ethical model work when stakeholders seem to be at odds with each other? Shareholders versus employees, for example, or that kind of thing. How do you manage the multiple stakeholders that may have different stakes in the game?
I'll start maybe. I actually think those can be aligned. And again, I think you have to hold your values, but if you have engaged employees that are doing their job very successfully, delivering for your customers are paying you, and you're getting the profits off of those, and those are going to the bottom line of the shareholder. And I just think, and you need to keep that aligned. You know, and I don't think, because if you just blow at the wind based on a stakeholder call, again, you're back to that slippery slope and violating the integrity and ethics and values of your organization.
Our alignment could be a little easier because we're a cooperative. So we're actually owned by our customers. So they benefit when we do well through our patronage payments back to them. And that keeps a very close alignment. That's one of the values that we see in this whole cooperative system that we have, is that we can keep it tight alignment there.
I would add a good open conversation with those various stakeholders to talk through the issues that are conflicts and try and create that alignment. I can tell you that it might not feel it from your perspective that they're demanding it, all of those stakeholders. We certainly see it in our industry. Our customers are asking us about our ethics and our values in the responses we give them. They want to know about our position and what we're doing for sustainability and corporate social responsibility, specifically asking those questions when we're bidding for business. That's starting to permeate its way into the marketplace. Employees do too. And you can see the reaction when they walk or they stay with us when they see how their behavior of the business is performing internally against the ethics. So I'm feeling it across the stakeholders, day to day, more so. And I'd offer good, open dialogue, rigorous communication with those differing parties to try and get people aligned around the right path forward.
Is the market sensitive to those behaviors that cost your company on the quarterly earnings report for long-term value? How does the market react to you on these issues?
Well, we don't have that issue being a cooperative. One of the benefits of it is we're able to look at making, longer-term decisions, making investments over a longer term, and in particular, our board and our owners are willing to say, you're investing for the future, and so you don't have to maximize those short-term profits for us. So that's been a benefit of corporate structure. So I will defer to the others on the more public side of things here.
Well, again, the reason we have our sustainability report online was a request from some of our institutional investors, and our investor relations group, when they brief these investors, they're briefing them on both the ethics and sustainability. And again, I think a lot of our investors believe, well, yes, they're watching on on a quarterly basis. They're looking are you sustainable long term with this kind of returns? And remember, our employees are a major shareholder of our corporation, and they see it every day, and they go online, they read these reports. And I do think you got to hold that values, and you got to drive that forward.
Yeah, I would chime in on all of those, and I'll try and do this briefly because I want this to be the panel, but I think there are times, Bruce, when stakeholders are in conflict. I think there are times when values are in conflict. And we can try to align them, but there are times that you're going to find them out of alignment. And so we talk in our book about tilts. Sometimes you have to tilt to the short term, and sometimes you have to tilt to the long term. We're not going to make our numbers this quarter because we're investing in this long-term program. Or I'm going to have to put that program on hold because if I don't make payroll next week, I'm out of business. But you can never tilt on the ethics side. So it's a judgment call, as they were talking so eloquently there. And maybe my word wouldn't be stakeholders are demanding. I think stakeholders are moving with their feet. They're leaving the companies. The employees are just moving on. The customers are not buying. So it's not that they're all out there with the picket signs and the pitchforks demanding this. If they don't see the kind of behavior that we're talking about here, they're just gone. There are too many options out there. And I don't think the market, Bruce, is homogeneous. I think the day traders are gone. If you miss your quarterly numbers, there's a growing number of investors who understand what these panelists are talking about and say, that's where I want to put my money for the long term. And I think that's what we have to hope, that becomes a bigger and bigger segment of what's moving the markets. But we had a question over here.
Let me ask two questions, if I might, because I won't get another chance at the microphone. Mr. Ambrose, you talked about 3 times a year your ethics and sustainability officer reporting to the board on a number of metrics. If you could share one of or 2 of those metrics with us, that would be great. And then, Ms. McBride, you talked about behavioral characteristics that you use to recruit folks. If you could share 2 or 3 of those behavioral characteristics that define ethics for us, I would appreciate that. Sure.
Well, I'll go. Well, there's a suite of metrics, but you know, very simple. What are the number of cases that have been called in? You know, there's open, what have been investigated, what have been closed. How many of these are anonymous? How many guidances have we given out? And they'll actually look at, in some cases, they'll look at trends. Is there any trends anywhere, patterns of the types of calls? You know, is there a cluster of a certain type? They'll analyze for that, right? So it'd say, do you have if you got a remote site, small site somewhere, you're getting a rash of calls, which might tell you you've got an issue out there because it's a smaller site, or some, you know, and there's other ones, but severity of the cases as well we watch, you know, and I'll volunteer because someone may ask it. You know, the most frequent ethics complaint that comes in is really an interpersonal issue, right, with a supervisor or something, because they can use the line. Now, we usually work that out of our HR team and go in a coach or see what's going on or in there. But those are a preponderance of a lot of the calls as well.
Excellent.
But again, we hold leaders and supervisors to our leadership standards. So we need to figure out, as a new leader, do they have the right training and coaching, those things, and we'll go through that process as well.
So in our hiring process, we start out with, we've got a mission, and our mission is really to serve rural America in the areas of agribusiness, power, communications, and water. And we've got a philosophy, too, that we've got the same compensation programs for every employee. So from our administrative staff and our operations clerks on up to our CEO, you have the same program. Now, you've got different factors on those programs and clearly different pay levels. But to give you an idea of that, it was really focused on a teamwork and a corporate basis. So when we look at some of these characteristics of fit, when we have people come from other areas, when we're interviewing them, if someone comes in and they're really focused on being an individual contributor, and an individual contributor where, you know, I had one guy once I interviewed and he said, well, you know, I want to get X% of the fees I generate from this business to me personally. And I said, well, that's not a fit for us. Those types of things are not, you know, you need to be in a different organization, because in our organization, the entire organization needs to do well for all the employees to do well. And so those types of fits of buying into our mission, wanting to support rural America, having the values to understand that we may not be the most aggressive lender in the market because we're looking at things more holistically, maintaining that value for the organization long term. Those are the keys that we look for in that type of fit with someone.
Excellent. So other questions from
Well,
yes?
well,
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you all very much for your time and insight tonight. I have to say that I'm somewhat frustrated. One of the initial statistics we were talking about was how like 33% of the American public doesn't trust corporations, big business. And while I think that the programs that you guys have enumerated, the individual employees' ethic programs, are very poignant and meaningful, I think it misses the target as far as what the general public cares about. Like, I think I could work at Google, say, and be ethical, do my job ethically every day, but Google itself could do unethical things, say infringe on privacy. What do you think your corporations are doing outside of individual ethics inside your employees to make sure that the actual decision makers, that the holistic strategy and the impact on the whole globe or nation is still ethical on the, in the broader sense that people actually kind of care about?
Well, let's see. I'll start with that one. Again, I think they're related. You heard me mention, at least from a corporation level, not only the individuals, but walking the talk and behaving to our value system as a corporation. We walked away from an acquisition, fit that, which would fit in our case. I also would say there's sometimes we're competing and customers inadvertently provided us data we shouldn't have. We disclosed that, and to a point where they delayed or cancel an acquisition, because basically it's like inside information that we would have that our competitors would not have. So they'll have to deal with that, and we'll disclose that immediately, because you can't let time go for that. Bringing up some of the other things with privacy, one of the things I think is a challenge for all of us to have a dialogue that you're talking about is the pace of technology change is way out faster than our pace of ability to go in and set up processes or policies or things around at a level and talk about that. And that's probably an area of discussion, I think, for the country and for the government, is to talk about that. You look at the technology turns and what Google's driving or any other firm or and things. It's one that we're going to have to learn how to adjust to that and really understand the ramifications, and not just what the consequences are, but a lot of times you need time to step back and say, what's the unintended consequence of that action and or those policies or that technology. And that's an area I think we have to improve more in, across the board as a society.
I'll give you a good live example as to what Level 3 is doing in terms of lobbying around policy that's good for the greater whole here. I'm sure many of you picked up the net neutrality debate that's going on currently. Well, Level 3's position on that is that we vote and stand for an open internet that encourages innovation and new ideas and does not support some of the recommendations that have been coming through about the creation of fast lanes and fast tracks that people will pay for. And the downside of that is those that don't go down the fast track get a we'll see serve mentality. Well, that could be affecting 911 calls, could be affecting bank details, health records. We just think that's socially not the right answer. It's not a commercial driver that's driving us for that position. It's more around public policy and the right to the internet that's created the world that we all live in. And the constraints and the notion of fast highways being paid for by certain people who can, and allowing the rest of the population to have a best efforts experience as opposed to largely what we see today, we don't stand for that. That's not what we're about as a company.
Let me add a postscript to their comments, and that is that I think you have to put your question in context. I understand your frustration. We have some very leading edge, wonderful exemplars, but it's not the standard out there yet. Social change like we're talking about here takes time. I think there's a sea change coming in how capitalism, market-based organizations are going to operate. And it comes from progressive leaders like this. It comes from the Institute of Enterprise Ethics. It comes from the MBA students at Daniels and the other universities. It's going to take the boards who haven't been concerned. Most boards are not doing what the boards of these companies are doing. It's going to take those boards to select CEOs that understand this. It's going to take institutional investors who are not going to put their money in certain places, and that's going to take some time. So that may not be a satisfying answer to you, but I think the sea change is coming, and I frankly think it is unstoppable. So that's my postscript. Well, we need another question for the panel here. Yes, right down here.
Yeah, I'd like to play devil's advocate for a moment. Earlier in the discussion, there was talk about the introduction of the whistleblower line and those kinds of tools that now you hear about in corporations. My question is, for any of the panel members, is if you've had to deal with that, the reality is that individual comes forward within that organization, and then there are issues that leadership has to deal with to quite honestly protect that employee on a go-forward basis once they use that tool. So I would appreciate your commentary on if you've been in that situation or if you've had to deal with that, You know, how has your organization, how have you managed that process? And along the way, how have you engaged HR? Because the other thing happening in business today is, you know, the feel-good HR manager is long gone. I mean, this is, you know, the level of professionalism and engagement by the HR leadership has forever changed. Yet in my own experience, what I've seen is they don't have the authority that they should have within the organization to engage with leadership and be part of the decision-making process of what happens with that individual or with that situation when that whistleblower line is used. So it's a loaded question, but I'm curious.
Well, I've had that example, and I've had it actually not used by the whistleblower line, but having an employee who went to our human resources group to report on another employee something they were doing. And in that instance, our human resources group involved senior management, involved our ethics officer, and I can tell you right to this day, I don't know who the employee was who referred the problem to the organization. We've got such a tight rein around that at my level, I still don't know who that was. So that person was very protected in that no one knows. We only took the information and dealt with it from that stage on what he or she said and did the research we needed to on that end of it. So I think you've got to have tight, close working relationships between human resources and your ethics side of your organization and your senior management. And you have to have a culture that says, it's fine that I don't know this. It's better that I don't know this, and not one where everybody is trying to find out that type of information.
Yeah, I'd build on that and say, I kind of mentioned before the metrics. As we monitor our system, if we have those kind of calls, whether anonymous or come through, we track those. That's a negative metric to us for our system. And what I mean by that is we want them to feel comfortable to talk to their immediate supervisor, talk to their HR person. I mentioned one of our 60 ethics officers through the company, and then ultimately if they want to call an anonymous. But we actually have a privacy officer that assures their identities are protected. I will never know people, my 14,000 people, I won't know if it comes to that. We also have a program for non-retaliation, even in case they're found out, and it's trained yearly. You'll see we have a lot of yearly training here, don't you? But and a lot of this stuff is delivered online through, thank God for the internet and IT, because otherwise we'd be a lot of people in classrooms, but some of the stuff we deliver individually. But again, we have examples, and we will not tolerate that, and they're allowed to, even if they think they're retaliated on, they're allowed to bring that forward, whether it's directly or anonymously. Okay. So you have to have this, again, you got to take fear out, which is why an anonymous call was viewed as a negative metric.
Andrew, did you want to make a comment?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, Rick's doubled down on the same thing. Through level 3, we have the same groups and setup and mechanism for managing those situations. All I was going to say is rarely do I, in a 5,500 person organization, get brought in on the details of the name of the individual. Yes, around the topic, the situation, how we're going to apply judgment to what do we do, but the name, not relevant for the conversation, neither does it get surfaced.
Okay. We're going to take time for one more question, and then I'm going to ask the panel to make some closing comments. We want to be respectful of your time, and you've been very patient, but we do have time for, let's say, one more brief question.
Thank you, Bob. Up here.
Okay. Sorry, the light's in my eye.
Can any of you think of laws that need to change to encourage longer-term thinking in your organization or your industry generally?
We may have time for another question. We have reporters here in the room, and it may not be a fair question to put the panelists on the spot with laws that they'd like to have changed. But I'm not hearing any immediate answers, so I'm going to exert moderator's and take one more question.
That's right, I'll answer that.
One more question? All right, then why don't we, yes, over here. And the last one, let's make it brief, please.
the young woman who asked a question a couple questions ago, what I heard in that, I mean this with respect, is just a latent distrust of business there, right? And I would stipulate that, you know, business has contributed probably to creating that mistrust. But this may be a question more for you, Bob. You see a lot of young people coming through the university. Where is this coming from? It's definitely worse. You saw it in Occupy Wall Street. It wasn't there 30 years ago, this high degree of just automatic mistrust of business. And do universities or have a responsibility maybe to mitigate that? I'm unclear on where this crisis of confidence is emanating from. It can't just be what businesses are doing, because most businesses, especially large businesses, are putting investments behind programs and are taking these issues seriously. If you spend any time in the workforce, you see that. You see that most businesses operate responsibly. So where is it coming from, and how can it be overcome?
Well, I'm not affiliated with the university. I'm just a friend of Dan's here, so so I'm not really qualified to answer that. I have been affiliated with Trust Across America, Trust Around the World, and we're doing a lot of work on trust. The Edelman Trust Barometer has been going on for a couple of decades right now. I think it's caused by a variety of things. There are no simple answers to these things. I think the financial crisis of 2008 and the behavior that came out of that, the housing crisis, what happened with Wall Street and the bundling of these kinds of things really hit people hard. I think the 24/7 news cycle where this is going on and on and on and on, I think the fact that there have been some horrendous scandals that have blown up just get people's attention, and the media likes to sensationalize this kind of thing. So I don't think there are any simple answers to this kind of thing. I can tell you this, that a lot of thought leaders are working on the issue of trust right now. I've been a contributor to several trust books. One's just coming out next month. There's a lot that can be done to build trust. Business is responsible for a lot of this, as is Washington, K Street, as are religious organizations, as are sports organizations, which have broken our trust so many times. And it's up to us to start talking about these kinds of things. So I don't have a simple answer to your question, but I'm thankful for your attention and for leaders like these who are helping us to address these issues. So I'm going to stop the questions now. We're going to hang around here afterwards, I think, and we can take some of those. So I'd like to ask Andrew perhaps to start with some closing comments, then we'll go to Rick, and then Mary. I'll make a few brief comments, and then Dan, back over to you. Okay?
Yeah, I would, you've got the theme through the conversation here that this is a long-run play that requires continual attention and investment each and every hour, each and every day for all employees. It's really not the leadership only, it's not the leadership down, but it permeates all the way through all of the employees of the organizations. Responsibility to drive and stick to what we lay out in our ethics and value statements and expectations. But from my perspective, I am seeing a turn. You said a tide change.
Sea change.
I've seen the intensity pick up across all of our stakeholders and their expectations. And I think if you fast forward this together with the dominance of the millennials that will work its way through our human capital structure, the expectations are changing. I know that our company is right behind it.
Excellent.
Yeah, I think it's been a good dialogue tonight. Appreciate that. Appreciate the questions. It's going to be an ongoing topic, like we say, a marathon. And the trust issue I struggle with, you know, because it's always, I had a grandfather, died when I was very young, and I got his one quote growing up over and over and over, which was, you know, it's always easy to tear a person down or find fault or tear an organization down, but it's a lot harder to build up and add value and find the good and build up. And we fixate on the problems, right? 24 hours a day, you said, the 24/7. Maybe we need a news channel that just focuses on all the good that goes on in this country. You know, and I would tell you, speaking for the 115,000 men and women of Lockheed Martin, these are dedicated men and women, not only in their jobs, they put out almost 1 million hours we track of community work. They have funds for affected employees by hurricanes and things. They do some of the toughest missions for this country, from fighter planes and defending the lives of men and women, to discovering the cosmos and, you know, why the atmosphere disappear on Mars. Just the bulk of the people are good, and you have a couple of these instances that can damage. But I also think organizations and they get large, you can have bureaucracies, and they can stumble too, because just like organizations can learn, they make mistakes. And we jump on that, and we got to go after, you know, there's a lot of good going on. Even the housing crisis, right? There was good intentions there trying to get everybody a house. You can talk about the implementation and things, but again, how do we set those controls in place to go forward and move on as an organization and a country? And I think that's important, but it is a journey. You're going to stumble. We even make mistakes in putting some of our training together, by the way. And things is that we have to laugh at ourselves and kind of move on. But I mean, I think every one of you, you're graduating, have your ethical standards, go to an organization that values that, and good things happen.
Excellent. Mary?
Thank you. I agree on the sea change. I do think we're seeing more and more of a focus on this throughout the country and throughout the world, and we're going to continue to see that focus. Just like Rich here, our employees are great. They're committed to our mission. They are strongly supportive of it, and they do request that we be involved in corporate social responsibility, environmental sustainability, ethics. It is going to continue in this way, and I guess I would echo to the comment, go to a place that is ethical, and if you're ever in an organization where the ethics don't live up to yours, leave, because sometimes those aren't going to change, and you just need to move on to somewhere else.
Excellent. Well, I'd like to thank our host, Dan Sweeney, and the Institute for Enterprise Ethics here. You're doing noble and worthy work, and we appreciate you. I want to thank the sponsors of this event. We need more sponsorship. We need more organizations funding this kind of effort, so I put in a plea for that. I want to thank our inspiring panelists today. You give me hope to see what you, ladies and gentlemen, are doing. Let's give them another round of applause, please. I started out with some negative stats, and I want to end up with some positive stats because I'm pretty optimistic about the future. Ethical companies build trust, as our panelists said so well, with their stakeholders. Let me quote you a few other stats. Trusted companies earn superior financial results. Fortune's 100 best companies to work for and great places to work have earned over 4 times the returns of the S&P 500 over the last 7 years. 4 times the returns. Forbes and Government Metrics International have produced ratings of the most trustworthy companies list for the last 6 years. They conclude trustworthy companies have a lower cost of capital, outperform their peers over the long run, and have minimized the risk of negative events. Trust across America, trust around the world has shown trustworthy companies outperform the S&P 500 by a factor of 200%. So not only is this stuff the right thing to do, it's financially sound for all the reasons that our panelists said. So what's our bottom line tonight? Ethical leadership avoids financial implosions. It gains loyalties from stakeholders. It unleashes innovation in employees. It engages the hearts and minds of the workforce, and it builds companies that outperform financially. It's not easy. The work that these leaders are doing is the marathon. It's the metrics. It's the follow-up. It's the role modeling. It's hard stuff. And it requires, above all, leaders like we have had on our panelists here tonight. It's all about leadership, the kinds of leaders that are prepared at the Daniel School and some of our other schools. So for the sake of our future and for the, let's give these leaders and the leaders out there who are going to do more of this in the future our unflagging support. Thank you very much for your time tonight.
And thank you, Bob. Excellent participation. I was expecting moderation. We got a lot of participation.
Oh, sorry about that. You knew I'd chime in there.
I know this was not an accidental selection. And Mary and Rick and Andrew, thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to come and have this dialogue with us. And I'm just delighted that it was, in fact, a dialogue, not only among the people on the stage, but with all of your participation here from the audience. I want to thank you for that. I want to thank you for your support of the work that we're doing just by your being here to give voice to these efforts and to move this effort along. And I want to particularly thank you for your insightful comments. It's not often I see my good friend Bob make notes because he heard something he hadn't thought about before. And I want to thank you very much for your encouragement. As Bob, I feel better about things after having this conversation. So let's keep this dialogue going. There's several ways we can do this. We intend to do this every year. In the meantime, we will post the proceedings of this event on our website. Not all 2 hours of it. Nobody has the patience for that. We'll do you the favor of editing it, objectively, of course. So visit the website now and then. There's always new stuff on there. See what's being talked about, see what positions we're taking, add your own point of view to this dialogue. We'd really appreciate that. Now, for those of you who, if you look on your name tag, I don't even have one, have a red ribbon on your name tag, we'd like for you to join us for a reception in honor of our speakers and moderator. You can access the reception with your red ribbon through this door. For those of you who don't have the red ribbon, please don't take it personally. We have a limited capacity, and we'd appreciate if you would exit up and out the upper door, and there's 2 exits, one on each end of the building. So thank you again for joining us tonight. Thank you again for your participation. Thank you again for getting behind this effort to elevate ethics. Good night, and please travel safely.